Larry Kutzler, you raised an issue during the break. Why don't you raise it on air and let's deal with it?
I think since the 70s, things have changed so much, and that's when I came up as a Christian in the early 70s. And back then, the pastors really had messages that were more prophetic from the scriptures, not something that was made up of their own imagination. People like David Wilkerson, and they really created a certain sense of awe or fear, an honor of God, which I don't find in today's pulpits as much. They speak as if God is our friend, but never is someone that we need to fear as a judge. Do you gentlemen sense that in your ministries? Do you think there's a change somehow that has happened over the last 20, 30 years?
I do. I think you hit the nail on the head, Larry. I think that is probably the biggest problem why certain things aren't addressed. It's the fear of man is a snare. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. And people in pulpits are afraid of what people are going to say about them. They're afraid to offend. They're afraid that people won't like them. And they are not concerned about what God thinks. I can assure you the number one thing that drives me to be in a pulpit is that I fear God. I fear what I'm going to say. I fear that I know I'm going to be accountable to Him. And I want to do what's right. So I'm going to address those things. But Larry, I think you hit the nail on the head. If men would fear God, all the way from Washington down through the pulpits, down to our leaders in schools, then we would do the right thing. I think there'd be a great awakening in our country too.
It does help. I go to a lot of churches around the country when I'm visiting and traveling, and I find that there's a big sea change, like sociologists say, the sea change, a change that goes in a direction that'll never return. And everything I hear is all about the wonder of God, which is fine, but I never hear about the sin. The old hymns like the blood will never lose its power and things. None of those things ever come into play when it comes to worship or even in preaching.
Well, if I could just read an email from a pastor's wife, again, going back to emails that I got as a result of writing about Remnant Church and Remnant believers. She says, I am the pastor's wife at a Remnant church near Ottawa, Canada. We have a wonderful small church whose members understand the times, but we have trouble expanding because people here don't want to hear the truth of our times. Sure wish people who are looking for a Remnant church could find us. That's Phyllis, and she's near Ottawa, Canada. Okay, the pastor's wife, Larry, whose heart is aching for some of the things that we're talking about. And you were a pastor for a lot of years, too. So did you experience some of this?
Oh, absolutely. Our elders and leaders of the church wanted me to not get on topics that were controversial.
Okay.
I mean, I've said this many times, and I was told repeatedly, you're here to help build this church. You're here to bring the nickels and noses into the church. And those kind of topics that you're talking about is divisive, and you drive people away. I was chastised many times.
Well, I think you probably talked about some of the cultural issues, perhaps.
I did. I talked about homosexuality, and I had more people email me and say, I would be embarrassed if I brought my gay friend to church. So, I mean, what do you do with that?
Do you think, gentlemen, I want to go back to some of my questions I have here. Do you think that some of these folks that I've heard from, you've heard me read some of their emails. Here's another one. My husband and I are definitely remnant believers. Your article describes us, and it is encouraging to know we're not alone. We speak the truth. We get blank, strange looks, even from family who profess to know Christ. They think we are out in left field, and again, echoes the same sentiment. Do you think, Mark, that some of these people are looking for perfection because they will never, ever find it? But I'm going to answer that question. I don't think they are.
You know, Tom and I have pastored a long time. I think between the two of us, we got 60 years of experience. And we'll both tell you that there are always people coming, and they want a church that has everything that just like they want it. Like you just went to a restaurant and this has got to be perfect. And we all go to restaurants and we all order different things. But when we come to a church, it's filled with people on a journey seeking Christ. And when I trusted Christ in 1979, I didn't know Jesus as well as I know him today. And so you have all these people at different levels, and also you have tares with the wheat. You remember that parable that Jesus gave, and that is such an important thing. I mean, if we're looking for a perfect church, what I tell people is remember this. this. Jesus grew up in Nazareth and went to a little synagogue that probably had less than 50 people. It was a small synagogue, and it wasn't probably not a really dynamic place. And then he went down and worshiped in the temple, and the temple was being run by a bunch of crooks. We know what the Sadducees were like. They were denying everything basically about the Bible, and they're running this thing. And then the Pharisees were there, and it had to break his heart, but yet he was still there. And that's the reason I'm still in ministry. I still believe in the church. Remember this: when we insult the church, we're insulting Jesus's wife. And if I insulted Tom's wife, he'd probably punch me in the nose. And I just think we need to be very, very careful. The church is what Jesus is building. He promises to build it. He's working to purify it.
Right.
He's using you. If you're following Jesus and you love the Scriptures, love that pastor you got, love that church. You might remember the story of Apollos. Apollos comes to town and he's preaching and he's teaching the way of Jesus accurately, but only up to the baptism of John. And then a couple of people take him aside and instruct him in the way more fully. And what a great example they were. You can find that in Acts 18. And I think that's the reason we're still in the places we are. Use those opportunities to strengthen the body of Christ.